Welcome, folks. You're here tonight at a mayoral forum on policing and community safety. My name is Anthony Pierre. I'll be your moderator for the evening, and we're just going to give it just another few seconds to let a few more people join us. Great. So thanks to everyone for coming out tonight. It's been a really long year around policing and community safety in this city. And in some ways, this week has actually felt even longer. And words like justice and accountability and reform and defund get thrown around a lot, even though I'm not always sure that everyone means the same thing when they say them. So one of the things that we're going to do tonight is really get a sense of what these candidates for mayor actually mean when they use these kinds of words. And I want to just remind folks that actually back in 2013, which was the last time that we had an open race for mayor, our city elected someone who spoke about reform, who talked about a tale of two cities, and really captured our imagination with his understanding as a white father of what it's like to have a Black son in America. And so I just want to name that 8 years later, we've got 1,500 more NYPD officers than we had in 2013, that the NYPD expense budget is 1.2 billion with a B, dollars higher than it was when Mayor Mike Bloomberg was in office, and that the overall NYPD budget has risen 16%, while social service agencies like the Department of Social Services and ACS budget have increased by only 5%. So it's safe to say that our current mayor has been a friend to the NYPD. And so tonight, we're here to hold candidates accountable to what they promised the electorate. And this is more than a candidate forum. I want you all to really think of this event as one of the many job interviews that people are holding for who gets to run New York City. So as we spend the next 90 minutes together, as you watch all of these candidates state their positions for why they should get the job of being mayor of New York City, really ask yourself, do I trust this person's plan for managing the NYPD? Do they have the skills and the vision to make New York City safe for me and my family? Because we've already got a mayor who's forgotten the job that we sent him to City Hall to do, and we definitely don't need another. So welcome. It's going to be a great night. And so I want to welcome our candidates. It's a busy night. It's a wild campaign season. There are a lot of candidates. So what you'll see is that we'll have candidates joining us and leaving throughout the night. I'm going to try to hold some space and make sure that it doesn't feel a little bit all over the place and that we can sort of stay on topic here. So first, I want to welcome Maya Wiley and also Diane Morales and Scott Stringer. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And we know that, again, you're very busy and your calendars are even busier and that you all are gonna have to leave before the night is over. And before we actually go into our debate questions, I actually want to introduce our ASL interpreters. So right now you're hearing from Jonna Owen, and then we're also going to have Amy Meckler here. So I do just want to remind candidates not to speak too quickly, to be mindful of the interpretation. And then as we start to get into questions, I just want to name for folks that I'll be asking questions that cover the issues of policing and community safety. And the areas we're talking about are community safety. We'll get into police unions, NYPD discipline, police surveillance, broken windows policing, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to talk about policing in schools. So thank you. And for the majority of our questions, we'll keep our candidates to 60 seconds. There will be points in which I'll give candidates 90 seconds to answer just because there might be questions that are a little more complicated that require a little more time. Because there are so many candidates joining us tonight, there are 7 candidates joining us tonight, we want to make sure that we have time to hear from everyone. And so let's get this party started. So this first question, I want to start with a question about NYPD discipline and transparency. So with this week's conviction of the officer who killed George Floyd and the police killing of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant in Ohio, as the verdict became known, public attention has turned again to systemic issues with police violence and lack of discipline and accountability. The public's perception is that the NYPD rarely fires officers who kill, brutalize, sexually harass, or lie in any official capacity about New Yorkers. It took over 5 years for Marley Graham's mother to secure a discipline trial that resulted in the officer who killed her son to resign. It took over 5 years for the cop who choked and killed Eric Garner to be fired. And now, almost 7 years later, a number of other officers involved still haven't been fired or even disciplined. This July will mark 5 years since the killing of Delron Small by Officer Wayne Isaacs, and this month marks 2 years since the killing of Kowalski Trawick, but there hasn't been a discipline trial in either case, or in the police killings of other New Yorkers like Antonio Williams, Mohammed Ba, and Alan Feliz. None of the officers who became notorious last year for their COVID policing or policing of protests have been fired, but some have retired before discipline trials could take place. There are many problems with the NYPD discipline system that enable continued police violence against New Yorkers, including the process overall and their discipline standards, known as the discipline matrix. So the question I would ask to you, and again, you have 1 minute to answer this question, is what are 2 things you will do as mayor to ensure that officers who kill, officers who kill, brutalize, sexually harass, lie in any official capacity, and disrespect New Yorkers are fired in a timely way? And with this question, we'll start with Maya and then go to Diane and Scott. And Maya, you're on mute.
My life in the COVID verse. Thank you.
It happens all the time.
I know. Look, as someone who has both been a civil rights lawyer my whole career and racial justice advocate, and has worked on a criminal justice initiative in post-apartheid South Africa and chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, including getting the Daniel Pantaleo case over to the police department with charges and fighting to hold on to civilian prosecution of that case. You know, we have to do a couple of things, since you can only give me time for a couple, but one is police commissioner does not get final say in discipline. We make that something that has civilian oversight, and we make sure and we pull out all of the offices where both the judges, the administrative judges, and the prosecutors work for the police department in trying these cases. We've got to have that outside the police department, and we have to make sure that the process is fast. There'll be no more special treatment for police officers that we, the public, don't get if we get into trouble with the law. It is going to be swift and fair, but it is also going to be neutral and not managed inside the police department.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks for keeping to time. And I actually forgot to mention something very, very important, which is that we do need to keep to time, which means that I'm going to have to do that thing that no one wants to do, which is there are going to be points where I may have to interrupt you and mute you. So just know it's all for good democracy. And Maya, I would love to ask you a follow-up question here. And the question really is, thank you for mentioning your role in working to secure a firing on the Eric Garner case. And, you know, advocates, I think, have really spoken about how long it actually took to get Daniel Pantaleo fired. Actually, it took 5 years, and it took 5 years of sustained organizing and pressure and advocacy. So what do you have to say to folks about just the time frame of waiting 5 years after an internationally known killing of in New York City to see some small modicum of justice?
Yeah, you know, look, and as someone who was a supporter of the Obama administration and his presidency, the Obama administration failed to deliver the civil rights criminal prosecution that was promised, that was underway in its investigation. And then we had the failure of the police department and let's face it, city government to push to take action in the case. And that's why when I got to the CCRB, I started working on getting that case over there, but it shouldn't take that long. And it shouldn't be dependent on all that failure as someone sits there and collects a paycheck. So I'm going to make sure we cut through that. There's not going to be a decision from a Maya Wiley as a racial justice attorney and a civil rights lawyer as mayor that's going to allow those systems to continue, because it is simply unconscionable.
Thank you so much for your response, Maya. I think there is still, some question here about your particular role in terms of the de Blasio administration. I know we talk about federal and city and it gets a little bit complicated for folks. So is there anything that could have been done within the de Blasio administration outside of the federal purview to really move this case?
Well, yeah, moving the case. That was a decision that the mayor had the power to push and the decision making to make, and to push the police commissioner on and the internal processes. That's what I would have done.
Thank you. And moving on to Diane, I'll just repeat the question. It's been a minute, which is, what are 2 things you will do as mayor to ensure that officers who kill, brutalize, sexually harass, lie in any official capacity, and disrespect New Yorkers are fired in a timely way?
Thanks, Antonine. So, just this morning I was with Emerald, Eric Garner's daughter, announcing my plan for a community first responders department, which doesn't speak directly to what you're talking about, but I am reminded about the extent to which these things are all still very much with us. So I think that, the first quick answer to what I'm going to do is actually to significantly reduce the number of police officers we have in New York City. I've called for defunding the police by $3 billion and supporting our communities in reclaiming and redefining what public safety really means, because we know that it doesn't mean policing our communities. That's the first thing. The second thing, actually, I do agree with Maya that the systems that we use to bring these officers to justice have to be held outside of and independent of the court systems, the investigation systems that the police rely on, or vice versa. And the third thing I'll say right before time is, I think we need to implement an early intervention and early warning system for officers that we know begin to demonstrate problematic behavior on the job.
Great, thank you. And thanks for keeping the time. And Scott?
Anthony, I agreed with how you started the forum. The reality is we elected a mayor and he brought in an administration with the promise of progressive policies and fundamental police reform, and all we got was the status quo. Let me be clear. We are going to have a new disciplinary system as relates to the NYPD. I'm going to empower the CCRB and take the disciplinary authority away from the police commissioner and the police force, because we know that this kind of discipline is not discipline, it's slap on the wrist, and that has to change. Second, we have to have zero tolerance for killing, for assault, for abuse of power. Police officers have a badge and a gun, and with that, you decide who lives and who dies, literally. And we've seen too many people in communities of color dying at the hands of the police. We must have oversight. We must have a mayor who's not afraid to upend the status quo at the NYPD. The police commissioner I appoint is going to be somebody who's aligned with my values and my thinking.
Thank you, Scott. And I do have a follow-up question just about this ambitious and exciting sounding plan around taking control of the CCRB and giving them more power. What would that power look like? What are things that the CCRB is not currently doing that under this plan they would be doing?
Real power of discipline and the final authority. Right now it gets kicked to the NYPD and it's done. And everybody in town knows that once you get to the police commissioner's office, it's going to just end the way it always does. A couple of days here, a couple of days there. Yes, we have these big cases, but at the end of the day, there's no real justice. So I want the CCRB to have final say on discipline and expand its investigatory powers. If we don't do this, we're going to continue to have another 8 years of false promises and no real reform. It starts with discipline. It starts with building out a new view of policing. I know we're going to discuss that tonight.
Thanks. And for this next question, we'll go in reverse order. So we'll go from Scott to Diane to Maya. And Scott, this question is on police unions. So, and I've got a long preamble. We got to make sure that people watching know what we're talking about. We know that you all are really versed on these issues. And so we've got 2 questions here. They're both yes or no questions. And so 4 of the 5 NYPD police union contracts are expired, though they remain in force until new ones are negotiated. So it's expected that the next mayoral administration will negotiate new contracts with NYPD unions. Unlike other worker contracts, police union contracts often include items that many would say should be determined by the public as part of public policy and not behind closed doors in secret negotiations. 2 examples. After the June 2020 repeal of the New York State police secrecy law known as 50A that allowed mayors and police departments to keep police misconduct and discipline information secret, it was revealed that some of the NYPD police union contracts include clauses meant to keep some discipline information hidden from the public. In certain rare civil suit cases, the city's law department can refuse to represent NYPD officers whose actions the city deems as indefensible. However, a March 2020 ProPublica article revealed that even in these extreme cases, NYC taxpayers pay for officers' civil suit legal fees because the city provides close to $2 million a year to a police union-controlled legal defense fund. So here are questions. They're both yes or no questions. The first question is, as mayor, would you commit to ensuring your administration does not agree to a police union contract that keeps any misconduct and discipline information secret? And the second question is, as mayor, would you end the city's practice of paying the civil suit legal fees for officers in cases where the city's law department has deemed that the officer's actions are so egregious that the law department refuses to represent those officers in court? So I'm gonna acknowledge we've been joined by Sean Donovan. I'm gonna ask if you all could, if Sean, if you could stay out of this round, I'll repeat the question. But if you could just yes or no here on both questions.
The answer is yes to both.
Thank you. Diane?
Absolutely yes to both.
Maya?
Absolutely yes to both.
Great. Sean, thanks for joining us. I'm just going to reread these 2 questions that are on police unions, and they're yes or no questions. So we'd appreciate if you could keep your response brief. And so as mayor, would you commit to ensuring that your administration does not agree to a police union contract that keeps any misconduct and discipline information secret? And the second question is, as mayor, would you end the city's practice of paying the civil suit legal fees for officers in cases where the city's law department has deemed that the officer actions are so egregious that the law department refuses to represent those officers in court?
I'm going to make it a unanimous yes to both.
Awesome, great group. All right, so we are going to talk about policing in schools. Great. So, and for this question, we'll start with Diane and go to Maya and then Scott and Sean. Great. All right. So in addition to the presence of the NYPD School Safety Division, young people say that precinct officers and other NYPD personnel are a constant presence in and around schools with predominantly Black and Latinx students. The NYPD responds to mental health calls at schools, uses schools to track down students with open warrants for minor offenses, and are responsible for the majority of arrests and summons for non-criminal violations and misdemeanors. As mayor, will you disentangle the NYPD from our public school system by prohibiting them from responding to mental health calls from schools, tracking down young people at their schools, and eliminating arrests and summons for non-criminal violations and misdemeanors in schools? And just a reminder, you have 1 minute for this question. I'll repeat it at the end for the candidates who have just joined. And Diane, if you could start.
Sure. Yes, I will absolutely disentangle the police from any school-based issues, including removing the existing school safety officers. You know, we know that our children, that the school to prison pipeline starts for our children in a way that it doesn't impact other non-Black and Latino low-income kids. and that it starts with policing in our schools. We know that our children are expelled 3 times more than white students, that they're 3 times more likely to face the juvenile justice system as a result of all of this. So I have actually called for the removal of school safety officers from our schools. In addition to the entanglement of of NYPD, I've called for the creation of the Community First Responders Department. I had a press conference this morning announcing the alternative interventions that would provide mental health, medical, nursing, other types of counseling support for people that are in crisis. And that's the same kind of support that we need to provide to our students in schools, in addition to creating the kinds of student support services that our students really need to actually be able to feel respected and valued and to learn in schools.
Thank you. And Maya?
So the short answer to your question is absolutely yes. We will not have police officers as mental health responders in any circumstances, let alone schools. I've already talked about the fact that we'll pull out and create mental health crisis response because of all the 911 calls that go to the department that become a badge and a gun responding when what we need is a mental health professional and services. But I've also already said in my gun violence prevention plan that I'm going to take, and all of my plans are taking already, just based on what I've already proposed, $1 billion, taking it from the NYPD budget in order to invest it into communities and needs that we have. But that includes an $18 million participatory justice fund. That is money for communities that have high rates of gun violence to invest in the things that the community needs, like workforce development, like making sure there are all kinds of programs in place. But I've also said, separate and apart from that, that I'm also going to use those resources in order to fund trauma-informed care in schools and create student support teams.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Maya. We're at time. Thank you. Scott, and then we'll follow up with Sean.
Look, the fact of the matter is that when there is a police intervention at a school, that never ends well for the students. So why do we have police in the schools, and why do we have, at the first sign of a mental health issue or a conflict issue, the first thing we do is call 911 and the cavalry comes? And usually what happens, as it did in the year 2018, when 60% of Black girls were arrested and almost no white girls, and you could see the data play itself out. I agree with my colleagues. We need a mental health response in our schools. And by the way, post-pandemic, we need it top to bottom. I want to put 2,800 new guidance counselors in the schools. We could replace the cops and put the guidance counselors in that will provide those services. And I think we have to do it now more than ever. But we do not need to have police come in with no mental health experience, with no understanding of the conflict resolutions that should be applied in the school system. We need to think differently about it.
Thanks. And Sean?
Sorry about that.
Good.
I am one of 3 candidates, along with Diane and Maya, that were targeted by a Daily News editorial the other day for standing up strong for removing police from our schools. I have not only said that, but also that we need to remove the prison cultures from our schools with getting rid of metal detectors and other evidence of the way we mistreat our students too often. And I've called for creating what I call PPARs to replace the school resource officers that would be fully trained in mental health and other support that really get to the root causes of the challenges that we're seeing. And that is a full effort that ties into my work to make sure that we fundamentally remake the way we respond to mental health with homelessness. I've worked across the country to create those kind of systems like Cahoots in Oregon, and I would do that here in New York.
Thank you so much, Sean. And we've been joined by 2 more candidates. So welcome to Ray McGuire and Eric Adams. I'm just going to reread this question, which is, as mayor, will you disentangle the NYPD from our public school system by prohibiting them from responding to mental health calls from schools tracking down young people at their schools, and eliminating arrests and summons for non-criminal violations and misdemeanors in schools. And Eric, if you could go first, and then Ray.
Yes, I'll be clear on my policies. Non-criminal offenses, we should not issue summonses. Youthful offenders and those other reports. For any police response, it should be dealing with imminent threat to life or physical injury. Other than that, we should have real trained social workers after school, and we should make sure that we utilize the resources to really build out a school-based safety system that will participate and have both faculty, students, and staff that are assigned to the school. And I would change the attire that our school safety personnel is using. They are not police officers, they're peace officers, and their role should be to make sure our children are safe, not only inside the school building, but around the school building as well.
Thank you. And Ray McGuire, you've got 60 seconds.
Yeah, I would say in my plan, I have the creation of an emergency social services office, which is 24 hours, 7 days a week, that could be deployed to the schools. I think we need to change the profile, work with the principals to make sure that we have the right personnel there who is trained, and make sure that we invest in the counselors. Today, the national standard is probably 1 to 150 students. In New York City, we probably have 700, 1 to 700. So we need to invest in the guidance counselors. And to the extent that there's an incident, we need to make sure that we deploy what I call my emergency social services offices to do just that. So that's part of my plan. We need to make sure that the school environment is safe and has dignity.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have some follow-up questions. So for you, Eric Adams, the follow-up question that I have is, what would you say to young people who say that an officer outside of an officer's uniform would still be an officer if they're playing the role of policing within a school?
That's why it's so important to have students, faculty, and staff to come up with their own public safety plan for their schools. Because just as I have heard young people say they don't want school safety officers, I've had several young people email me and visit me at Borough Hall and stated that they need and want school safety officers somewhere part of their school system. And so I don't think this is a zero-sum game. There's a voice out there for not having school safety officers during crisis moments when there's real violence. And there is a voice out there with students and parents that are stating that due to violence around their schools and in their schools, until we get to the point that we don't need any school safety peace officers, they do want some form of safety in their school. And I respect all sides of this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for recognizing that there are so many sides. And I guess a final follow-up question here is, how do we actually bridge all of those sides, right? I think a concern that I have as a private citizen is that it often feels like elected officials do take sides, right, as opposed to representing everyone. So how do you plan to bridge the gap between both sides?
And that's what I just shared. That's why your question is a great one. First of all, my significant other was a principal. She understands about the safety of schools, and she understands how important it is. If you create a public safety committee in the school made up of students, made up of faculty, made up of teachers, let them sit down based on the school, based on the community, based on the desires of the cross sections on both sides of this conversation, you can come up with the right discussion on how to keep the school environment safe. Some of the students may say, and the committee may agree, not to have metal detectors, not to have school safety officers, not to have other elements, and come up with another way. Let's leave it up to the school community to make that determination, because it's not a one size fit all when it comes down to safety in our schools in the city.
Great, thank you. And one thing I want to note is, especially because we've got so many folks joining us right now, we're gonna keep our follow-ups to 30 seconds as opposed to a minute. So thanks for the way that we've been going so far. And we wanna start to get into community safety. And so I've this next question, during Mayor de Blasio's tenure, funding for the NYPD and city corrections increased by over $1 billion. The NYPD's annual expense budget is about $6 billion annually, while the total cost of NYPD spending is about $11 billion annually. The budgets of the NYPD and corrections are more than the combined budgets of the Department of Homeless Services, the Department of Health, Housing Preservation and Development, Department of Youth and Community Development, and Workforce Investment. So the question is, as mayor, would you maintain a budget where the NYPD and corrections budgets exceed the cumulative budgets of these other agencies? If not, how would you reprioritize the city's money and reallocate some of the NYPD's budget to other city agencies? And so I'm going to ask for this question, if we could actually start with Sean Donovan and then go to Maya Wiley and Diane Morales, Scott Stringer, then Ray McGuire and Eric Adams.
So I've laid out what I believe is the clearest pathway to getting to $3 billion a year reinvested from our criminal justice system more broadly into community-based efforts like housing, job training, violence interruption, and restorative justice. My commitment is to move $500 million within the first 2 years, and by the end of my first term, get to $3 billion. That would make New York City the leading city by far in the country, having reallocated 20% of the budget. And I know this can work because when I was housing commissioner, I took my Section 8 vouchers, gave them to folks coming out of Rikers, and the results were remarkable. 95% of those folks were stably housed, getting back to work, hadn't reoffended. It was so successful, it's been replicated in 40 cities and states, 40 cities around the country. And that is an example of the kind of reinvestment I know I can make happen because I've done it.
Thanks. And Scott?
Look, I believe we need to cut the NYPD budget. I've laid out a plan to get there. I put out a comprehensive public safety plan that puts us on that path by dramatically reducing police responsibilities. And for the groups on tonight, as I did during the city council budget fight, I will partner with you to make these issues happen with speed and decisiveness. But let me tell you how we get there, because we throw out a lot of numbers. This is what I would do as mayor to reduce the budget. I would disband the specialized units like the Strategic Response Group, the Vice Unit. I would move police from traffic enforcement. I would substantially reduce the police fleet. And also, I would move 911 out of the NYPD, and that would ensure public health professionals respond to calls. I'd cap NYPD overtime. I'd invest in violence interruption programs that prevent crime. I'd baseline youth jobs, demand internships. We would create stable healthcare and housing, and we would get guns off the streets working with the community-based organizations. This, if successful, would reduce the NYPD present budget by hundreds of millions of dollars in reductions, both at the NYPD and at the Department of Corrections. And so part of my public safety plan is to redirect resources to keep kids out of the criminal justice system, to end over-policing. And as we do that, we will save literally over $1 billion.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you, Scott. We're at time. And if we could go to Maya next.
Sorry.
Thank you. Look, I am going to start with pulling out all the functions in the police department that never should have been there in the first place. That is the fact that there are 911 calls that go to it for mental health. We've talked about that already. Pull that out and have crisis response intervention, but also community-based mental health services, including trauma-informed care in the schools. But I'm also going to pull out traffic. There's absolutely no reason why you need a badge and a gun for routine traffic stops. Pulling out school safety, but I've already got $1 billion worth of money that I'm going to pull out of the NYPD by not hiring the next 2 classes, cadet classes, making sure we're investing that in $5,000 a year community care grants for our 100,000 neediest New Yorkers, including folks who are undocumented. It's going to include creating community care centers, drop-off centers for childcare and elder care, and the Participatory Justice Fund that I mentioned. But we also are going to make sure that we are getting more services. But I'm going to do a soup to nuts transformational audit of the police department. Yes, and the Vice Squad. I absolutely agree with some.
Sorry, Maya, I have to interrupt you.
Partner with the public to do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Diane.
Yes, thanks. So you're spot on, right? Over the last 40 years, policing and police spending in the city has grown faster than every other spending for any kind of other service. And the reality of it is that investing in our communities and in the human capital and the human growth of our communities is in fact a direct investment in community safety. So that as we have increased investment significantly in policing, we have in fact divested from the services that in fact result in our communities being safer. All of the agencies that offer a safety net and invest and really provide what our communities need to be able to live in dignity, whether we're talking about housing, whether we're talking about public health, whether we're talking about youth development or workforce development, all of these things are things that we need to be investing in over policing. We have the largest policing budget, not just in the country, but in the world. It is completely bloated and unnecessary, and we need to divest. I'm the only candidate in this race that has called for defunding, and that's what I mean.
Thanks. Thanks for staying on time. Ray?
All right. So when you ask about the budget, you need to actually understand what the budget reflects. The largest increase that we've seen over the period that you've referenced is about 40% increase in administration and communications. The actual patrol budget has remained relatively flat. So what we need to do is to go through and look at what's behind the operating budget and why it's increased so much. The increases is part of a larger trend of what I see unchecked budget growth over the last decade. And we're going to fund new public safety priorities. Everything's got to be on the table, but you got to look at where the largest increases have occurred. You have to understand how the budget works. And you also have to understand the implications of having safe streets to make certain that we can address all the challenges that we're currently having with people feeling a little anxious about going outside and increasing that anxiety because people are not feeling so safe in the streets. So yes, let's take a clear view of the budget, understand the priorities in the budget, and understand how to manage the budget so we can deliver safety to our streets. Better policing is what we ultimately need.
Thank you. And finally, Eric Adams.
Thank you. And, I have to agree with Ray. I think that while we take our foot off the gas, off the accelerator, apply the brakes in spending, we need to do it in a manner that is not going to really hit at the foundation of our city. Prerequisite to prosperity is public safety. I'm going to say it over and over again. We have an overproliferation of guns in our city. We have a real gang crisis. And I sat down with top gang members in the city and spoke with them about taking them out of gangs. But we had a woman who was shot in Park Slope with a handgun. There are too many guns in our city. And we can do it by becoming more proactive and not reactive. I would look at the $400 million in overtime. I would civilianize the department. Far too many officers are doing civilian roles. And I would make sure that the right units are doing the right job and be cost effective while doing so.
Great, thank you. So we're gonna speed things up a little bit. I know some folks have to go, so we wanna get it spicy with the lightning round. So, and for the lightning round, what we're gonna do is actually, we're gonna go in the order that folks came on the call, and then we'll go in reverse order. So for this first question, our order will be Maya, Diane, Scott, Sean, Ray, and Eric. And I'm not gonna moderate, I'm just gonna ask you to unmute, keep it moving. Folks are at home, we wanna keep it live, right? So for this first question, again, the order is Maya, Diane, Scott, Sean, Ray, and Eric. As mayor, name 2 to 3 organizations you plan to consult regularly for guidance when considering positions and reforms to decrease police violence and increase police accountability and transparency. Again, no long story, name the names. Maya.
Make the Road, CPR, obviously. And I'm also going to consult with community group leaders.
Thanks, Diane.
Yeah. Life Camp and Save Our Streets.
CPR action, make the road. Many of the people who are on this call tonight who I've consulted with over the last many years.
Great. Sean, Ray, Eric. You're on mute, Sean.
Not trying to keep it spicy. I'm sorry. CPR, Vera Institute of Justice, Fortune Society.
Great. Ray, Eric.
CPR, Life Camp, and the faith-based organization.
Man Up, Life Camp, and the God Squad.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to do another lightning round. We're going to go the other direction, right? So we'll go Eric, Ray, Sean, Scott, Diane, Maya. Remember your place. So it's a yes or no question, no stories. Do you support decreasing the NYPD's budget and redirecting those funds to community infrastructure and programs? And please remember the part about the redirecting the funds. Eric.
Yes, I do support doing it in a smart way.
Yep. Yes. Yes or no? Yes or no? Where we at? Yes or no? Was that a yes or a no?
Then I can't answer that because I'm not going to fit into that box.
That's fine. Ray?
Yes, but?
Nope. Sean?
Yes.
Thank you. Scott, Diane, and Maya.
Yes, no, but.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yep.
Great. All right. This is the last piece of this lightning round. We're going to go back in our order of who came on first. Maya's like, I didn't know it was gonna be great for me to be on early. So we're going to go Maya, Diane, Scott, Sean, Ray, and Eric. And this question is a yes or no question again, which is, actually, I'm sorry, I'm doing a different question, which is, do you support removing policing, whether NYPD or another entity, from mental health response, homeless outreach, responding to substance use, and other social services, and reallocating those monies to non-police programs and services? So yes or no? Maya.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Awesome. Great.
What do you redirect? You're no police, and what are you doing? What are they answering yes to?
Is that a yes or a no?
I'm just trying to figure out what you want to do with the police. You just take them out of the equation altogether?
Are you asking for the question to be repeated?
Yes, yes, that's a yes. That's a yes.
Okay, so one more time, because maybe folks' audio wasn't working. Do you support removing policing, whether NYPD or another entity, from mental health response, homeless outreach, responding to substance use, and other social services, and reallocating those monies to non-police programs and services? Yes or no to Ray and then Eric.
I can't answer that. I'd say I support making certain we got the right services there. That's employee social services. So that's under.
Thank you, Ray. We're gonna have to move on to Eric. I'm so sorry.
I got you.
Again, I can't, that question I can't answer yes or no to.
Great, thank you. We really appreciate you all going through these lightning rounds with us. They're not easy. They're not meant to be easy, and it's not an easy job. And thank y'all so much for answering the tough questions that people are wondering as they're watching right now. So I want to get into, and I'm hoping to catch a few of you before you have to leave at 7:30. I want to ask another community safety question, which is, New Yorkers have often created community-based responses that don't rely on police to prevent and interrupt violence in New York City. These community-based programs have addressed a wide range of violence, including gun violence, street sexual harassment, sexual assault, racist, anti-LGBT, and anti-Semitic, and other violence. One successful effort to reduce gun violence that is independent of the NYPD is city funding of gun violence prevention programs and the gun violence crisis management system. While many believe there needs to be an even greater financial investment in community-based gun violence prevention programs, there have been almost zero investments in other citywide community-based interventions to prevent and address other types of violence. So the question here is, as mayor, what are 2 examples of community-based violence prevention programs that don't involve the NYPD that you would prioritize funding citywide? And here we're going to go again in the order that folks came on. I know that it seems like Diane has dropped off, so we'll get her back in the rotation. But Maya, all right, we got you. You heard us from the other part of the Zoom.
Yeah, I just had to take a bite of something. Sorry.
It's all good. Yeah, I'm hiding. If you turn off your video, I'm like, they're gone. Great. So we'll go Maya, Diane, Scott, Sean, Ray, and Eric.
So huge proponent of violence interruption. And it was the first candidate to have a gun violence prevention plan that put front and center investments in community, including and completely non-policing interruption. But it includes community-based work on mental health outreach and trauma-informed care. But also when we talk about hate crimes, the investment in community-based organizations to be bridges with one another, whether it's anti-Asian, whether it's LGBTQ, anti-Black, any of the violence that we're seeing that's hate violence, investing in community-based organizations to address and bridge with one another.
Thank you. And Diane?
Yeah, so this morning at a press conference, I rolled out a new proposal to establish a community first responders department. This department would be responsible to respond to any sort of issues in the community that are not violent crimes in progress. That the department would actually be staffed with, to address all these, what I consider to be public health issues. Everything that we're talking about are public health issues. They'd be staffed with trained professionals that would have the expertise to provide intervention and de-escalation, to address homelessness issues, mental health issues, substance abuse, and all the other behavioral issues. But then they would actually be part of a larger ecosystem of human service providers, community-based organizations, and other programs that will be able to connect the person in crisis with the kinds of support that they need in order to move forward, rather than our current system, where in the best case scenario, if a police officer is responding, the person gets locked up and released the next day without any help. And in the worst case scenario, they get shot and killed.
Thank you, Diane. Scott?
Look, look, 40% of 911 calls are not for crimes. They're for mental health issues, wellness issues, quality of life issues, and yet we send the police right in, roaring right in. It's got to stop. We have to direct a new way of thinking about how to actually go into communities and cure violence, and that starts with expanding our cure violence programs. We have 17 in the precincts. We need to ramp up to 77. We need to shift the paradigm to prevent kids getting into gangs by giving them the summer jobs and the youth programs that they need. And when you do that with cure violence, when you do that with interrupters and mentoring programs, this is not pie in the sky. This actually works. That's a fact.
Great, thank you. Sean?
So with the $3 billion that I've committed to reinvest, we're going to be able to create a full spectrum of programs beginning during incarceration. Barred Prison Initiative is a good example for me that I've been working with on my criminal justice platform, to a whole range of housing-based programs. I talked about the effort I created to use Section 8 vouchers. We need to be expanding NEON. We need to be working closely with all of our institutions, including our religious institutions. And there are many examples of those, as well as a broad range of housing efforts like Fortune Society that I mentioned. But I also want to really focus on one other thing as well. We have to stop the flow of illegal guns into this city. And I'm the only candidate with the deep relationships right to the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, and his senior leadership, deep relationships with other mayors and governors around this country. We need to build a national effort to stop the flow of guns so that we don't have them on our streets in the first place.
Thank you. Ray, and then Eric to close.
Yeah, so we do need to invest community-based anti-violent programs in the same neighborhoods. They're going to include the following. We're going to have violence interruption programs to going to provide special training to community leaders who are trusted to intervene and to de-escalate. Going to have hospital-based intervention that's focused on the friends and families of many of these crime victims to prevent cycles of retaliation. Going to have school-based conflict mediation for the young people. Going to invest in mental health services, job training, which is part of my Go Big, Go Small economic comeback. Employment programs focus on high-risk individuals, making certain that all of our 8th graders and beyond have a summer program, have a summer job that exposes them to different career opportunities and gets them paid, keeps them out of trouble. And we're going to shift the resources within NYPD budget, notwithstanding the fact that in a utopian response, everybody says they're going to cut the budget. We need to keep our streets safe. We need to get the guns off the street. So you can't do that when you're cutting the budget. You can reallocate it, but you can't cut it. And we got to integrate the officers into the broader community that are affecting the 10 precincts where we see the highest level of violence. We got to get real here.
Thank you. And Eric, can you close out on this question?
Yes, and unfortunately I have to depart after this answer, but I think there's a combination of what we heard from all of my colleagues that's here. Number one, we have a downstream mindset in dealing with crime instead of an upstream mindset. Archbishop Desmond Tutu stated, we spend a lifetime pulling people out of the river. No one goes upstream and prevent them from falling in the first place. And crime is part of that. It is predicted that 30% of the men and women at Rikers Island are dyslexic. So let's go upstream and have dyslexia screening so we can prevent crime. We have 80% of those who are incarcerated don't have a high school diploma or equivalency diploma. That's an indictment, not on their action, but an indictment on our educational system. If you don't educate, you will incarcerate, and you will create the atmosphere to incarcerate. So I say, let's take our city upstream, let's prevent and close the pipeline that is feeding our prison industrial complex.
Thank you. So sorry you're not going to be able to join us. We're going to have a great question on surveillance. So here we go. Police surveillance technologies pose a unique risk to Black, Latinx, and other New Yorkers of color, communities that routinely experience aggressive and abusive policing. The NYPD currently uses biometric recognition technologies like face recognition, even though studies have repeatedly shown that the technology is significantly less accurate when used on people of color. Because of this, cities like San Francisco, Portland, Boston, and New Orleans have banned the use of facial recognition technology by law enforcement. So here's the question, which is, as mayor, will you commit to signing an executive order banning the use of facial recognition and other biometric surveillance technologies by city officials? And welcome to Andrew Yang. Just a reminder to folks, we've got 60 seconds to answer these questions. And we're gonna go we're gonna go in the order of how folks came on. So Diane, and then Sean, and then Ray, and then Andrew.
So yeah, my answer for that is an overwhelming yes. My commitment, my platform, my administration will be totally focused on dismantling all of the long-standing, deeply rooted systemic and structural issues that have disproportionately impacted low-income Black and Brown communities for centuries. And policing can be directly traced back to the very beginning. And so yes, I will do everything that I can to ensure that we are moving away from this existing system that continues to overly criminalize and overly police our communities. And the surveillance, the facial recognition technology, those are just adding to already deep inequities in the way our communities are kept safe. And this would absolutely be something I'd be willing to do.
Thank you. Sean?
So I would ensure that no surveillance technology or technology of any kind is having a disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities and New Yorkers. And so unless there was indisputable proof that we could create technologies that would keep New Yorkers safe without those disproportionate impacts, I would sign an executive order, but I would go farther than that. And this is based on my work in President Obama's cabinet, where I created the very first chief privacy officer for the United States at OMB. I would do the same thing here to ensure we have full overview of that. That person would be accountable to the chief equity officer to look at data and ensure that any program that is trying to keep New Yorkers safe is implemented in that way. And I would use the kind of civil rights advances that I created at HUD under disparate impact that won a landmark Supreme Court decision, ensuring that disparate impact on people of color is always against the law.
Thank you, Sean. Ray?
The answer is we got to go back and look at the intent of the technology. And we understood from the outset that there were challenges with the algorithms, which would translate into incorrect results with respect, especially to Black and brown men versus white males and white people, white figures. And so we knew from the outset that the technology was inappropriate, inaccurate, and written results that continue to proliferate the challenge that exists between law enforcement and the community. So unless there was trusted and verifiable data that says the algorithms had been repaired, which there is not, I would be in favor completely of signing an executive order that banned the recognition about which we're talking. So the answer is yes. We need to fix the algorithms. The technology can be helpful, but right now it doesn't work.
Thank you. And Andrew?
It's such an important question because we live in an era where technology is getting more and more sophisticated, and we do have to ensure that it doesn't, that it's helping, not hurting. For me, I want to dig into the data on both sides of this, and I'm just going to share like a use case, which is that I was with a gentleman named Noel Quintana who'd been slashed on the subway with a box cutter, and there was a like a not so great photo of the attacker, and that attacker is still at large. And the question is this technology that could help identify that person? And if the answer is potentially yes, then I don't think we should be circumscribing it wholesale. We have to make sure that, again, the technology is serving its intended purposes and not victimizing people who are already marginalized in various ways. But I'd want to make sure that the data, frankly, is clear one way or another. And this technology can continue to improve.
Thank you. And just a follow-up, because we had some mixed responses. So for folks who are still weighing both sides, just a follow-up question around, I guess the question here really is, we're looking at an issue that other cities have taken a definitive stance on. So just wondering, thanks in the chat, 30 seconds for follow-ups, but just wondering, how does your position relate to the national landscape and where we're moving nationally in terms of surveillance reform?
No, I'm happy to answer this because it seems like it might be directed at me. We certainly want to take lessons from what other cities are doing. But at the same time, we have to have our own judgment as to whether something's working right here in New York City. And I'm someone who, especially in a matter this serious, that I'd want to have a clear sense as to what the pluses and minuses are. If the minuses outweigh the pluses, of course, you don't use it. But are there cases where this might help identify someone who's a danger to the public in an era when, frankly, New Yorkers are very, very concerned about, like public safety issues? And so I wouldn't want to make a determination based solely on what other cities are doing. Like, we have to look at it for ourselves.
Thank you. Great. All right, so we are going to move on. We're going to go in the reverse order of how folks came on. So Andrew, then Ray, Sean, and Diane. And the question is, in 2019, New York City spent an estimated $456 million enforcing low-level broken windows infractions, which accounted for 28.5% of all NYPD arrests and violations issued for the year, including an estimated 96 million enforcing drug arrests and violations. Stark racial disparities persist within this criminalization, with Black and Latinx New Yorkers comprising more than 83% of those arrested or cited for drug offenses in 2019, despite similar use across populations. only 11.7% of people arrested or cited for drug violations were white, yet white people comprise 47.2% of the city's population. So here is the question. How would you address racialized targeting of communities of color for drug enforcement and broken windows offenses?
The war on drugs hasn't worked. Unfortunately, the war on drugs has morphed into a war on people, and too often it's people of color. I'm so thrilled, as I know everyone else here is, that we've legalized marijuana. We should be going further and decriminalize various drugs for personal consumption, frankly, in part because any administration of these laws tends to be racist in its application. The same is true for some of these nuisance crimes that you're describing, where there's been a movement to stop criminalizing poverty in various ways. And I think New Yorkers know that that is correct, that if we have resources, it should not be used to often effectively, harass New Yorkers who are doing something that doesn't truly pose a threat to the public. We should be focused on the real problems. I'm also excited that we're not going to be prosecuting prostitution for some of the same reasons. We need to be focusing on the real problems that New Yorkers are facing, and these problems of addiction are more public health issues than they are criminal. Thank you.
Thank you. Ray?
Yeah, listen, we've had longstanding policies that had, and I'm going to say, a disproportionate impact on Black and brown youth, especially. We need to abandon those. We abandoned stop and frisk. We need to abandon any of these policies, any of these procedures that have that kind of impact. It affects lives. It affects 750,000 to 1 million lives. So we need to abandon them. And what the facts have shown is that we've been more effective at making our streets safe when we abandon those and deployed other kinds of protocols and other kind of procedures to stop the kind of low-level crime that has taken place, the result of which is we need to prevent that. And my plan is to make sure to prevent that so we don't have to resort to these policies. And the policies that we do resort to shouldn't have the kind of impact that they're having, which is why there's such an outcry to stop them. So I would not be in favor of them. I'd be in favor of more effective technologies that make certain our streets are safe, that we can protect our communities, and that people feel safe in our communities. So I would not be supportive of that, and we should abandon it.
Thank you. Sean?
So I would add my voice to the support for the changes we've seen recently on marijuana. The investment of as much as $750 million a year into the very communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the kind of enforcement policies that you're talking about. And more broadly, we do need to be limiting a focus on low-level offenses and focusing on the guns and violent crime that are disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities. But more broadly, we have to create an administration in this city, which is what I would do as mayor, that looks at every issue as an issue of equity. It's why I've said that I will create the first ever chief equity officer in the history of the city, reporting directly to the mayor, who has purview over every agency to measure the impact, the disproportionate impact, whether it's of low-level enforcement or of any other practice by police or otherwise in the city.
Thank you. And Diane, please close us out.
Great. Listen, I've already called for the need for us to legalize all drugs in small amounts for individual possession. But the reality of it is that we all know that legalization is not the same as decriminalization. And we all know that our communities, Black and brown communities, are still disproportionately policed around these things, whether the drugs are legal or not. And so we need to actually move towards decriminalizing and making sure that those arrests are not taking place. We need to do everything I've been talking about. We need to decrease the police force. We need to provide alternative services to folks who are using substances in our communities so that they have resources, substance abuse resources, mental health resources, support circles, community groups. All of those kinds of things are the things that we should in fact be providing to our communities instead of any framework that involves policing.
Thank you, Diane. And a follow-up question here, just in terms of these alternative ways of policing. How do you actually see the implementation of that going with the current state that we're in of policing?
Yeah, so alternative to policing, in my mind, means not using the police. It means actually creating a whole sort of cadre of other supportive professionals across the system, folks that are reflective of our communities, folks that have been already harmed by these laws and can serve as resources to other people in the community, that can be trusted by members of our community and help people get connected to mental health, substance abuse services, whatever it is that they actually need to be safe.
Great. Thank you. All right. So we are going next. We're going to go, we're just going back and forth with this order in reverse order. So Diane, you're going to be up next, and then Sean and Ray and Andrew. And this question is about homelessness. Just give me a moment. There's a lot of pages over here. Okay, great. So the New York Times has reported that New York City doubled its use of homeless sweeps in 2020 to more than 1,300 sweeps across the city, even though the CDC recommended that all such sweeps stop during the COVID pandemic. Sweeps of homeless people are conducted by agencies that include the Department of Homeless Services, Sanitation, and often the NYPD. Homeless people report that during sweeps, DHS, and that's Department of Homeless Services, outreach teams function as a rubber stamp to the destruction of their belongings, that the NYPD presence is abusive and frightening, and that there is no offer of permanent housing, being swept and forced to move from place to place. So here's our question. Do you believe sweeps of homeless New Yorkers should continue as a policing and outreach strategy? Why or why not? 1 minute each. Diane, we're starting with you.
Great, thanks. No, I do not believe that these sweeps should be part of policing. As someone who actually created and ran street homeless outreach programs for young people in particular on the pier, the Christopher Street Pier, I know that it is much more effective to actually have folks who can meet people where they're at, build relationships, create trust, and actually then connect them to the services and programs that they need. So, I would connect that with my platform as that focuses on housing first, and housing as a human right, and housing for all. And the idea that we need to move towards really being able to provide every homeless individual in the city with a permanent, secure, and affordable place to live. And that does not start with policing. It does not start with these violent sweeps that are destructive and stressful and anxiety provoking. And it starts with someone who is there to provide help instead, not harm.
Thank you. Sean?
So as someone who started almost 4 decades ago volunteering in a homeless shelter, who interned for the National Coalition for the Homeless, and has spent my entire career working on these issues of homelessness, we know that this is not an effective practice, and that fundamentally we have to reorient the way we engage with homeless people in our city to get them the help, the support, and the supportive housing that they need. My sister was a psychiatrist who worked on street teams in New York. I know they can be effective, and I have made them effective in my work again and again. More broadly, though, we have to recognize that we need to reimagine our right to shelter in this city as a right to housing. Until we do that and fundamentally reorient our system to provide support and the permanent housing that's needed, we're never going to have an effective response in this city. And that is what I would do as mayor. I would ensure that we're dramatically reducing homelessness, just as I did when I was HUD secretary, where we ended veteran homelessness in more than 80 cities and states. Not reduced it, but ended it.
Thank you. Ray?
Listen, we have a legal and a moral obligation to treat each of our citizens in New York with dignity. It's important that when we get to the homeless New Yorkers that we provide services. First, we need to prevent the homelessness. Two, we need to provide the services. We need to have people who care, who can intervene. And we need to provide the wraparound services for those who are suffering from mental challenges, who find themselves in homeless positions. And we need to provide pathways to shelter, to homes. I was the other day sitting talking to a homeless person who was in a wheelchair. He says, Ray, I've been here for 2 to 3 years. I want to get out. I just want to have a place where I can put a roof over my head. I can have a hot pot, and I can have I can have some sort of refrigerator. I just need dignity. And we need to make certain that for all New Yorkers, especially those who are suffering from homelessness, for whatever reason, we need to prevent it. We make sure they have the services, the wraparound services, and then we need to get them into homes where they can have some dignity. My plan calls for that. My housing plan calls for that. Goes from homelessness to home ownership. And along the way, it's providing New York.
I'm sorry, Ray, I'm going to have to cut you off.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Andrew next.
Thank you. I was with a group of nonprofit workers from an organization called Breaking Ground that were interfacing with street homeless people in near Port Authority, which is something of a hub. And it's clear that those efforts work. We need to invest more in them. We need to invest more in supportive housing so that we have places for people to go. We need psych beds because many of them are struggling with mental illnesses and other issues. So that should be the focus. I've committed to reducing street homelessness by 50% over my first term, which is going to mean a massive investment. I do, though, want to say, like, I was in Jackson Heights, and there are edge cases where I think that, people in a neighborhood actually are concerned about. In this case, in Jackson Heights, it was 4 homeless men who were kind of, frankly, like not quite terrorizing the neighborhood, but not far from it. That there are edge case situations where you need to intervene in a different way. But the emphasis should clearly be on nonprofits helping people access supportive housing.
Thank you. And Andrew, I just want to follow up here because you mentioned mental health, and it's true, right? Like there's a lot going on. There's a lot that happens at the intersection of losing housing and mental health. And we know that in New York City, the Department of Health and Mental Health has reported that 1 in 2 New Yorkers has been experiencing mental illness over the last year. So understanding that, the follow-up question that I have for you, Andrew, this time is actually straight up directed to you, which is, can you clarify your position on supportive housing? Is that, when you say supportive housing, are we talking about shelters or are we talking about affordable housing?
Well, I'm talking about supportive housing, which is housing units that have built-in services for people who are struggling with addiction or mental health issues. And one of the numbers that hit me like a ton of bricks is that the number of psych beds has gone down by 14% in New York City over the last number of years at a time when the needs have skyrocketed. And so when you are working with someone who clearly needs that kind of help, we don't have places to bring them. But supportive housing is meant to incorporate those services, and it's exactly what we need. We need a lot more of it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And, because it's such a widespread issue, I just want to remind everyone that when we talk about 1 in 2 New Yorkers, we're talking about ourselves, our families, our neighbors, right? Great. So we are 4 minutes from the end, which means if you were waiting for another lightning round, I got it for you. Great. So we'll do these lightning rounds. And they go fast. Andrew, you weren't here. Don't trip.
All right.
So we'll go in the order that folks came on. It'll be Diane, Sean, Ray, Andrew. And they're yes or no. They're either yes or no questions, or we'll ask you to name a few people. No stories, right? We just give us what we're asking for. The people have 3 minutes before they have to go, like, put their kids to bed and do all the things, right? All right. So Diane, again, we're starting with you on this lightning round. And this first question, who are 2 to 3 people you plan to consult before you choose the NYPD commissioner? Again, Diane, Sean, Ray, Andrew, go.
Ooh, so I would probably say Emerald from my team. Eric Garner's daughter would be top of the list. Shit, I'm so sorry.
Cover your kids' ears if they're not in bed yet.
I think I would want to have a young person. I can't think of a young person off the top of my head, but I would want to have a young person at the table as well. and probably TSI Candy, who is the founder of Black Trans Nation.
Great, thank you. Sean?
Well, I would want to consult a lot more than 3 people, but if I have to choose 3, I would say it would definitely be Nick Turner. It would be Bishop Johnny Ray Youngblood and Chuck Ramsey.
Great, thanks. Ray and then Andrew.
I would say Reverend Waterman, Erica Ford, Chief Nelson.
Awesome.
Reverend Stephen Green, whom I met with along with Terrence Floyd here in New York. And then Eric Garcetti, the mayor of Los Angeles, because he's had some experience appointing someone in a similar role.
Great, thanks. Next round, we're going in reverse order. It's a yes or no question, no stories. So we're going Andrew, Ray, Sean, and Diane. And yes or no, do you support removing all policing, including school safety cops and NYPD from New York City public schools and redirecting those monies to support emotional wellness, educational supports, restorative justice staff, guidance counselors, nurses, and other student resources? Yes or no? Andrew Yang.
I want to follow the school administrators. No.
Great, no. Moving on, Ray.
You asked this question before.
It was a different question. It wasn't the lightning round. We're
gonna move on. Lightning round, huh?
We're gonna move on. Sean.
I'm gonna behave myself and say yes.
Thank you. Diane.
Yes.
Diane's like, yes, everything. Yes. Thank you. All right, so we're gonna close. We're at 8 o'clock. The people are going to put their kids to bed, right? So this is our final question of the night. So it's another yes or no question. And in your first year as mayor, would you consider appointing a civilian police commissioner? We're going to go in the order that folks came on. Diane, Sean, Ray, Andrew, yes or no? Diane.
Antonine, I'm consistent, yes.
Thanks, Sean.
I would definitely consider it, yes.
Great, Ray.
Yo!
Oh, you have an answer. You have a yes or a no.
You asked me yes and no. I got you. It's bedtime.
Okay,
I'm good.
Ray follows directions.
I'm in.
Andrew.
Heck yes. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. A big thanks to Diane, who stayed from the top to the bottom, very committed to this issue. And just want to say to folks who are watching, thank you so much for staying with us for these 90 minutes. Please remember, this is just another job interview, right? These folks, they are vying to become your mayor. They are vying to get a 6-figure salary out of your tax dollars. And the primary is on June 22nd. And I'm gonna ask when folks go to the primary that you remember this night, you remember how these candidates interviewed when it comes to policing and community safety, and really asking yourself, who is going to keep you and your family and your neighbors safe? Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Have a good night.